let's get started with resumes and tools of the job trade. So as far as attendance today, I do take attendance. However, if this is something that you have taken as part of an unemployment account, you will have to log into your unemployment account and put today's date on the Creative Job Search item that you put there, that you agreed to. One of the questions we get is, this is a 6-part series. Do you have to take all 6 parts? You certainly can. However, taking today's session will suffice to put today's date in that activity. So one of the things that we are asked every day is, when are we going to reopen? Some career force locations are open for appointment only, but the vast majority are closed to the public. That does not mean that we're not available. So please reach out with any questions you have, and specifically after this presentation, if you would like to have your resume reviewed, we can do that virtually. Virtually is a really fancy term for, we can do it over the phone, or we can do it through an email, or we could potentially even do a one-on-one through something more advanced like a WebEx or a Teams meeting or whatever your comfort level is. However, we are still here. We're still a resource for you, so please give us a call. I will be sending everyone the contact information for all 50 career force locations, and it is highly encouraged that you reach out to the one nearest you so you can develop that personal relationship with someone who knows the jobs in your area, knows the employers in your area, and that's really important. All right, so today is tools of the job-seeking trade. Next week, we will be talking about internet and social media with a focus on LinkedIn. So if you have questions about LinkedIn, or you are currently a LinkedIn user that would like to enhance your profile, please sign up for that session. Then week 5, we have the job interview, and then on week 6, facing unemployment at 50 and older. So before we get going with resumes today, we did talk about applications a little bit last week. Just a quick review, because we get this question a lot. The question is, why both? Why do I have to fill out an application and then put the same exact information on a resume? Well, first off, you don't put the same exact information because one of the application is the employer asking you questions, and the resume is you giving information. Now, much of it might be the same. However, it shouldn't all be the same. And the reason for that is, an application is something that the employer uses to filter. A resume is something you use to market. So there are things that they may ask in an application, like, why did you leave your last job, that you wouldn't include on your resume. And they should be treated as 2 separate items because they are viewed separately. Employers at interview are looking at your resume. Not as often do they have access to your application. At the beginning, when they're setting up the interview, they may pore over your application, but it's not necessarily seen together with the resume at the time of interview. So you do need to repeat a lot of information. If you don't put any dates of employment on your resume, you will be screened out of most interviews. And even if you have the dates on your application, once you're at interview, that resume has to speak for your work history. So if I'm going to get a pool of candidates from, let's say, my HR department, and they give me the resumes, and that's all I see, I'm determining your skills for that job, their relation, by that resume only. I might not even be able to see the application. So the average job application should take about an hour to complete. Be prepared with all of your dates, with all of your information. You don't want to be thinking about these things as you type it out. Sometimes that's unavoidable. I get it. Sometimes you may be searching online and find a job that is was posted a week ago, and it's due today. I recommend you would apply for that job if it's something you're interested in. That's why it's a really good idea to have a personal data record or some sort of document that you can refer to. I'll be sending everyone a document that you can print off. It's just a simple data record that you can put your dates and times of employment on there. Be as accurate as possible. If you don't know the dates of employment, look it up. This is a question I've received for 20 years. People saying, well, I don't remember. well, call that former employer. And if you can't get it, use your best guess, but there are other methods. Some of them cost money. You can develop an account on the Social Security website, and it does cost quite a bit of money, actually, but if you have them research your employment history, they can get the dates that you paid into Social Security, and it costs quite a bit of money, actually. I think it's, Gloria, correct me if I'm wrong, was it around $90 for an uncertified copy?
Yes, and then for getting a certified copy, it was $125.
Yeah, so if you ever get the dates, if you know the dates, put them in a trusted location. And what I recommend doing is, if you have a Gmail account or an Outlook account, upload it to your email, to your Drive, to your cloud storage. That way, if your computer crashes, if you move, you still have access to that. As long as you can get into your email, you'll have access to that data record if you store it online. So that's just something to think about. All right. So read instructions very carefully on applications. And one of the most important instructions is to fill it out completely. Don't leave things blank. You may say, well, that doesn't relate to me. In fact, I don't even like putting NA. I put not applicable, just to make sure. Keep really, really good records. If you misrepresent yourself on an application, that could take you out of contention, not only for this job, but any jobs down the line with that company. And it could be an honest mistake. I get that. But also, I have seen where people will flat out lie, have lied on their application because it really, really wanted that job, and they thought, well, it's not that big a deal. It just, it's going to give me that year of experience that I need for this job, so I'm going to, fudge the dates a little bit. That can really hurt you. So apply for jobs you are qualified for, and tell the truth, because this becomes a legal document, this application. And I've actually seen in years down the road, someone applying for advancement with a company. They looked at their original application, found basically a lie on the application, and that caused them to lose that job. Gloria?
Yes, I just had a question. It's how far back should you go in employment on your application? Since you should only go back 10 to 15 years on your resume, should you do the same on your application?
I'm going to refer back to read the instructions carefully. That gets tricky. When they ask, if they were to ask a question like list all employment, my goodness, they can't ask me how old I am, but if they ask for all my employment and I go back to the 80s, they're going to get an idea of how old I am, aren't they? There are things they can legally ask on an application that you might not want to put on a resume. So just follow their instructions. If they say, list all relevant employment or list your employment history, that's pretty vague. And we can use that to our advantage to go back as far as we want to show. Again, really let the application be your guide on what you need to put in there. All right. So again, this is just a brief overview of application. We went more in depth into how to answer questions on an application than last week's. That video is now posted on the virtual and interactive website. And Gloria, if you could copy and paste that into the chat window. That's where all the videos are for all past seminars. So if you have any need to look at past videos, you can access them there. So today's main goal is to talk about resumes. Resumes are one of the focal points of a lot of people's job search. I'm not saying that's necessarily true, that it should be. I think networking is one of the things we really should focus on. However, it's one of the most identifiable pieces of our job search. And it's what a lot of people start with. They think, well, I've got to get a good resume. And I don't disagree with that, because resumes themselves can be used for networking. They can be used for, attaching to job applications. They can be put up on social media. They are a big part of job search, but don't let it be the only part of job search. On a resume, you only want to include relevant information. Why this is important to put it this way is it's not everything you've ever done. It's not everything you listed for the last job you applied for, because they were asking probably for slightly different things. So relevance means specific to the request, and that's the job posting. We'll talk more about that. You want to provide evidence of your skills. That's the proof. You don't want to just say that I worked at a place for a certain amount of time. I've seen resumes like that, and they generally don't get interviews because I'm not hiring you for work history. I'm hiring you for skill sets developed within that work history, for experience. And job dates don't tell me that. And you want to explain how you accomplished that task, the skills used to accomplish something tangible. Like I was able to enroll 50 new customers. Okay, how did you do that? Did you do it through marketing? Did you do it through cold calling? Did you do it through networking? Now, when it says every bullet must add value, that's important. You don't want to waste a bullet. Put a different bullet in there. Every bullet can have a value, can have a numeric proof. So when you look at a group of, like, let's say here, 4 bullets, we have 4 bullets here, at least one of those bullets in a resume should have a figure, at least attempt to. Not every bullet has to have one, but you should at least attempt to say, here's the dollar amount associated with that. Here's the number of customers. Here's the percentage increase, because that's the best proof when you can have something that an employer can say, okay, I understand that. It's not a, just a statement. It's a fact. And always err on the side of caution when you do that, because you don't want to tell a lie. You don't want to overstate something you've done. All right. So with a resume, you're going to find out that there are many, many different strategies. There's a lot that goes into this. One is whoever you're talking to has a life history. They have a work history. They've had things that have worked for them and things that have not worked for them, but those were to employers they had marketed themselves to. They're not necessarily the same employers you're marketing yourself to. So what we're trying to do is give you overall best practices. If you receive different advice on resumes, that's fine. I know it's frustrating, but it's something you're going to deal with throughout your job search. Just take the advice, consider it, and determine, is it applicable to my situation? Is that something I'm comfortable with? Because in the end, the bottom line is you have to be comfortable with what you're selling. If you're using someone else's words, that's fine as long as they relate to your experience. At the career force locations throughout the state, we have people who look at resumes every day. And they're going to have different maybe ways of wording things, but you still have to sell it. So make sure that you're comfortable with it. Lori?
Somebody's asking, should your resume mirror your LinkedIn profile?
No. That's a great question, by the way. And here's why. You don't think that there's a difference between a profile and a resume. A profile is a more general snapshot of how I relate to an industry. A resume is a very specific, narrowly focused marketing tool towards a job. So if you're changing your LinkedIn profile every single time you apply for a job, you're going to wear out your network, because they're going to see Art updated his profile, Art updated his profile, and you're going to get this, you're going to be sending out a very mixed message to your network about what you are representing about yourself. So one of the tricky things about having an online profile, especially LinkedIn, is that you can't simultaneously market yourself to 2 different industries like you would within Minnesota Works. On Minnesota Works, we allow you to have 5 different resumes. And those, think of them as 5 different profiles that are seen separately by employers that are searching for people with skills. On LinkedIn, we don't have that ability. We are saying, here's me professionally. So if you bartend on the weekend, but you do data entry during the week, you've got to determine what side of your career do you want to show on LinkedIn. So that's a great question. I get that a lot. I hope that answered it.
Yes,
now,
very well. Good job answering. Art, I have one more question that a gentleman has asked a couple different times. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm not 100% sure even on the answer on this one. So it says, where on your unemployment do you put the classes on your unemployment account?
Okay, I'll get you some specific information on that. I don't want to tell you off the top of my head what the clicks are.
Okay.
But when you set up your unemployment, you said, here's the certain activities that I wanted to do as part of my employment. There'd be like setting up a MinnesotaWorks.net account, putting a resume on there. But you might have also said, I am interested in attending a creative job search. If that's something that you agreed to, then that would be in your activities, and I'll reach out to you and give you the specific clicks for that. All right. One person said, can you turn off your updates on LinkedIn? Yes, you can. And thank you, Ann. It is under reemployment activities on your unemployment account to mark that off, or to mark today's date on. On LinkedIn, it does allow you to turn off your profile updates so that people don't constantly get your message that Art has updated his profile. I still wouldn't do it, because what you're trying to do with your network on LinkedIn is create an image that I am experienced in this field. If you keep changing that image, it's going to create confusion for your network. Even though it may allow you to be more specific to a potential employer, I wouldn't play that game, because it's going to cause a lot of frustration for you. It's going to be hard to keep up with, and it's going to confuse your network. All right, so resumes. Here's a nice little acronym to spell out what resumes are. Resumes are a review of your qualifications. It's not everything you've ever done. It's not going into great detail about everything you have to offer, because we don't have enough attention from an employer to look at that. Most people with any kind of work history could write a 10-page resume. I know I could. I send that to an employer, and in the vast majority of cases, it's too much information. So a 1 to 2 page resume in most situations is ample information to entice them to bring me in for an interview. So it's a review of your qualifications, and that means essential information only. I don't have to put all of the things I can do. The average person has between 500 and 800 skill sets. I wouldn't even scratch the surface of that on a 1 to 2 page resume for 2 reasons. One, most of them are irrelevant to the job in need, and 2, they've spelled out exactly what I need to have on my resume by the job posting. So looking at that and replying to that information is the essential information that's needed. It is skills-based, even if it's a chronological resume. We'll be talking about that in a little bit, the different types of resumes. Always think the focus needs to be on what skills am I presenting in this resume. So what are they going to get? If they hire me, what are they going to get? And that's the skills I've developed through my work history. Now, be careful about the U. Unique means that their stories are unique. It doesn't have to look necessarily unique. It doesn't have to be, just something they've never seen before, because that comes off for most employers as something I'm not interested in looking at. I once had a resume from a client who did their resume in spiral. I don't even know how you would do that. It must be through some, Photoshop or something. So you actually had to turn the resume to read it. And they thought, this is the most unique resume an employer has ever seen. And I'm sure it was. But that's also probably not going to get you an interview. So the uniqueness is your stories. If you download a template from MS Word or from some resume website or from wherever, it probably has some filler in there. It has some examples. And the tendency is to look at that and say, well, that's pretty much what I've done. That's very similar to what I have accomplished. So a lot of people will leave that information. Well, I've seen that before. I've seen it lots of times before. So it's not unique, and things I've seen over and over and over again, I dismiss. I can't help myself. It's because it's just something that, I've seen that before. The uniqueness is your stories. We all have lived experiences that make us unique. Put that on your resume to show what you uniquely can offer an employer. So this is a marketing product. It's about you. It's okay to be part of a team, but take credit for what you have done. If it was something that you just participated in, certainly say, that this was, you participated in a team that rewrote the safety manual. That's fine. But if it's something you actually did, let them know that. Now, the most important part of this whole thing is the E. It has to be effective. It has to get you noticed. So no matter what anyone says about your resume, no matter what feedback you get, if someone says this is the greatest resume I've ever seen, or if you pay $100 from some resume place and they, you say, well, it's got to be great because this resume place, created it for me and they're professionals. If it doesn't get you noticed, it's not effective, and then you need to change something. Sometimes it's not only the resume, sometimes it's where you're submitting the resume to, but if it's effective, you're getting interviews. And then the last one before we get to some questions is specific. And the whole thing revolves around making it targeted to each job. Yes, Gloria?
Okay, so this question's a little bit long, but it's a good one. It says, what do you recommend for information that shows you're a quick learner or good communicator, something that may not tie into the posting itself, but adds value to you as your employee? And how do we identify those and decide which ones should or should not be on our resume?
That is a long question, and it's a good question. I'll try to break it down. So sometimes we double up. We double up on, here's a skill I really want the employer to know, but I don't want to list it outside of what they're asking for. So you can kind of double down. So let's say that they are looking for, an example would be electronic health records management. And you're someone who is very adaptable. Okay, and that's a huge skill, by the way, that all employers, whether they list it or not, are very interested in having. So you could say something like, adapted to a new electronics records, EHR, electronic health records management system, and acted as trainer for my division, something like that. And what that says to an employer is not only do you have EHR experience, but you were involved in the transition and helping others to adapt to it, because most people are reluctant to change. So you can kind of create a two-skill bullet statement that is something you want them to know that is in conjunction with something they want you to have. That takes a lot of finessing, by the way, and I'm not saying my example was the best one, but this is a perfect opportunity of getting something down on paper, doing like 3 different potential bullets that you would use, and then contacting your local career force location, have a one-on-one session with someone, send them your resume, send them the job posting you are reacting to or applying to, and say, here's what I want them to know, here's what they need from me, here's how I'm trying to say it, what do you think? And then you can get some feedback and you can get some ideas. It's really helpful to throw some things at somebody else who is used to seeing these resumes and these job postings, and they'll probably have some different ideas. And the back and forth can create a very effective statement. And that's important because an employer only knows what we tell them. And if we use bland statements, they're going to have seen them before, and they're going to go on to someone who has a more unique or more focused resume that maybe someone's taken a little bit more time on. All right. Next up, we're going to talk about the basics of resumes. The first thing is keep it brief. There are employers that will tell you, send us everything, we don't mind. In fact, I just heard from one the other day that if I get a 10-page resume, that's just fine. That's the exception rather than the rule. So 1 to 2 pages is usually what I recommend. However, specific knowledge, and I'll say this a couple of times, specific knowledge of any employer's process trumps anything you hear from me or anyone else. So that's where your networking comes in. If you can talk to someone who works at a company or who has interviewed with them before, who has gotten some feedback from them, that's gold, because now you have kind of insider knowledge and you know what specifically to do in your marketing piece to them. But if you don't know that, assume most employers want to keep it brief. The goal of a resume is not to get a job. I wouldn't write a resume if I weren't looking for a job. However, the goal is to get an interview. And in the interview, that's where I can tell my longer story. That's when I have an hour, hour and a half of their undivided attention. I don't have that on a resume. I have about 17 seconds. So think about that frame of time and how much information can I give an employer within that time frame. And I'm going to give you a little example of this. So what we're looking at here is an image from theladders.com. It's just a website showing the heat from an employer's eyeballs as they moved over the two resumes. I don't know exactly how they track this through a camera and eye movement. However, you look at this one here on the left side, notice it has very wide margins, and they're doing sub-bullets, so they even got wider margins, and everything's really crammed in, and there's no really place for you to focus on. So they just spent a little bit of time up here, and they kind of, I don't know why they looked over here, but they basically just perused the resume a little bit. Notice on this resume that has things spaced out better, that has headings that are easily jumped to, they actually got to the bottom. They actually went all the way to the bottom to the education because that was important to them, and they were easily able to identify it. So they spent time looking at this resume. One of the crazy things that I learned very early about resumes is the first impression an employer gets is, does this meet my expectations? Does it look like a resume? Does it look well formatted? Is it easily accessible? All of that is determined before they read anything. I'm not delving into a resume before I already have preconceived notions of what I'm going to find. So meet their expectations at every point by having something that is what they're used to seeing. And if it doesn't look like a resume initially, you've already kind of lost some ground. So a couple things, ways to do that. Oops. I'm clicking faster than my PowerPoint will allow me to click. So I'll wait. So use bold or capital letters to highlight information. I'm not a big believer, and I don't think you should be either, in going up and down in your font size. When you make something bold or you make it in all caps, it will, by its very look bigger, and it'll draw the attention to it. That's the whole idea of a format, is it draws attention to a certain area. If you overuse it, if you overuse capital letters, if you overuse bolding, it diminishes the impact. So one thing to keep in mind with capital letters, I've said this at many, many different workshops, when you put something in all caps on a resume, MS Word will not spell check it. And I find a lot of spelling errors when people put things in all caps. And the reason is we're so used to using spell check that we rely on it too much. Let me bring up, let's do it really quick here. So I'm going to look in the chat here. Is everyone seeing my Word document? You can just say yes. Oops. Scroll. Yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to make this much bigger, and I will say something like attention. Oops, first, I'm going to put it in all caps. Attention to detail. So when I hit enter on that, I just assume that Microsoft Word is going to spell check it for me, and I've relied on that for 20 years, and I just write the rest of my resume. When, in fact, there's, 2 misspellings and 1 misusage here. So a really good tool you can use is you can use something called change case, or just type it in lowercase first. And if you use that change case, it will then spell check it for you. And then you can use the spell check and make it everything right, and then turn it back into uppercase. I do see that more often than you'd think on resumes, and the reason is we only use all caps professionally within resumes, because otherwise, if you're using it, it means you're yelling at somebody, and we certainly don't want to yell at anybody, but it is a great way of calling attention to a heading, like your employment history or your skills summary or your education. I do recommend avoiding italics and borders and lines across the page, text boxes specifically. I'm sure everyone's heard of something called an applicant tracking system, ATS. There are 600 or so applicant tracking systems, and what these do is they take a look at a resume and they scan it for certain keywords. And text boxes generally are hard to for ATS systems to track. Not necessarily tables. When in doubt, by the way, keep it as simple as possible. There are certain businesses that use very old applicant tracking systems, and that's where that specific knowledge comes into play. And you say, well, I know that they don't like looking at tables, or when they see a line, it messes up the scannability of it. Then don't use those. But most modern ATS systems will work well with most formats within Word. The one exception would be text boxes. I do recommend leaving graphics off of most resumes. Now, if you're in the graphic arts field, and I've worked with many, many people who are, the expectation is you probably would have some sort of graphic in your heading. But for the most part, I leave them off. Yes, Gloria?
This is a good question. It says, my resume after 22 years in the same company often looks like I am overqualified for the jobs I've been applying for. Do you suggest I remove the more technical skills I am applying for IT help desk jobs?
Yeah, that is one of the trickier ones, because I worked with a lot of people who have, 20 years of experience, 30 years, 40 years of experience in IT. And they'll put things in like COBOL and Fortran and Pascal, and that's going to date you. Technical skills do date you fairly quickly. Also, they can create a perception of someone who's overqualified. So that's where the specific marketing comes into play. Yes, I would definitely remove things that aren't requested. There are some things that you might say this could add value, and there's an anticipated value through this. Be very careful about that, but they can be added also. I'll be including in the follow-up material an entire document on being overqualified, removing those overqualification statements. And yes, absolutely. In anyone's career, you can run across that. And in most cases, it's because we're telling employers things that they don't need to know. I once had someone remove a master's degree from their resume. And the reason was, when employers were looking at it for a entry-level clerical position, they were scared off by it. And once we removed it, this person got an interview. Now, that's a resume. On an application, you may have to list it because it asks you what's the highest level. On a resume, it's viewed separately. Yes, Gloria?
Somebody's asking, is a section including unemployment activities or classes appropriate? Otherwise, I may look as if I am just unemployed and not doing anything.
Yeah. So this is very, very specific to what we're all experiencing right now. And I have to say, I mentioned before, I've been doing this for 20 years. This is the most interesting time to be doing this type of work. And that is because we're getting a lot of people who are coming into a new situation. They have been employed their entire life, and all of a sudden now they're unemployed for a length of time, and it's new. And I understand that. It's scary. And you might say, well, would an employer actually hire someone who's been out of work for 6 months? Absolutely they would. But you're on the right track. How do I show an employer what I've been doing since that time? We put the most relevant information at the top of our resume because, like everyone else, employers read a resume from top down. And if there's something like, for example, some of you may be familiar with the Coursera courses that are being offered right now through the state. I'll be including a link to how you can register for that up until the end of the year. It's free, certificate-based or completion-based education from colleges and universities and businesses throughout the nation that is being offered for free till the end of this year. At least you can register for an account. So I'll give you a great example. If I were looking for work right now and I wanted to go into the IT field and I don't have maybe a ton of recent experience in that, there are several courses through Google or programming courses like Python that I could take. And yes, I don't have maybe the paid experience, but I do have recent training in. So I would include that under trainings and certificates. And I might put that towards the top because here's the most important thing about a resume, one of the more important things, you need to have current information. And if you don't have anything in the last 6 months from your employment, a great way of putting current information would be that you completed a certificate course, or maybe you took a test that maybe you paid for certification. By the way, Coursera, you don't have to pay for anything, but there are other short industry-specific things that you might look into. One time when I was unemployed, I took a Microsoft Office Specialist certification. It did cost me like 80 bucks, but for the rest of my life, I'm no longer self-taught in Microsoft Word and Excel. I am a Microsoft certified trainer in those two programs. And it was an investment in my career, but it's definitely something that helped me out. All right, so let's move on here. Really important on a resume and an application to be honest. You don't want to oversell your thing, oversell yourself. It's very rare that on a resume someone would be negative. I see that more on an application, like talking about why you left your last job. But I've seen some people do it on a resume too. They will explain why they left a position. There's no need to do that. It's not being asked because it's your tool. It's your marketing tool. You can omit things as long as you are being honest. Omission is not lying. So there are things we leave off a resume that maybe will be asked about in an interview or asked about on an application, and we need to have those answers, but think about the resume as only those things that help you. So focus on the accomplishments. What was the benefit to your employer, to your clients? And then again, over and over again, make sure it's targeted to each position. We did talk about overqualification. Like I said, I will send you a document on that. But the key to overqualified is if you're overqualified, it's because you're selling too much about yourself. You're not targeting your resume. Looks like there's a question from Glory.
Yes. Sorry here, it scrolled up. Let me just get to it. Okay, I don't have my 4-year degree, but I have 25 years marketing experience and a PMP. What should I list under education when I don't have a degree? I list my PMP under certifications.
Yeah, so two things with that. If you had some education, this is something that a lot of people forget to put on the resume. Maybe they took 3 years of college, but they didn't get a degree. If you are on your way to that or you had completed a certain amount, you can still list it. Just be honest about it. Don't say you had a degree if you don't, but if you did attend college, that's one of the screening options for some employers is they will put some college. It'll be high school, GED, and then some college, and then degree. So it is a acceptable option in some cases, but a lot of employers today are understanding that not everyone who's qualified for a job necessarily has that degree. So look for the terms that say related experience. And if it asks for a certain amount of related experience, make absolutely sure that your resume reflects that. That's your a huge opportunity to apply for jobs that in the past were not available. Now, real quick, I want to show you something that is really important when you're applying for jobs that require a certain amount of experience. This can be different in public sector and in private sector. And for public sector, if they are saying that you need 2 years of experience, and on your resume, you put that you work from 2018 to 2019, that may work in the private sector, but in the public sector, they may say that's 2 days because they can't guess. And you may have worked from December 31st of 2018 through January 1st of 2019. So they're going to give you credit for 2 days. A better option would be the month and the day. That still is different than the exact dates. Now, on most public sector, or excuse me, private sector jobs, like if you're applying to normal employers, we don't put the exact date. But if it's a requirement, if you have to have 2 years of experience, make sure that you show 2 years of experience. Don't make them guess. Looks like there was another question, Gloria?
Yes, no, this one is referring to an application, not a resume. But it says when an application asks how many years experience in the field you have, how do you not show your age if you have more than 20 years experience?
Yeah, that is tricky. There are some things that they can ask that do basically give your age. Normally what I do is if there's an option, I put over 20 years or over 15 years. Usually 15 years or above are enough. Otherwise, I segment it per job. So very few people have the exact same job title with the exact same employer for 20 years. Some people do. I do realize that. But think about, was it broken up anywhere? is there any way I could tell the truth, be honest, and say, from the last 15 years, my title has been senior buyer. Well, before that, I was a buyer, junior buyer. Well, I don't have to list that because it's not the most relevant work history and the most current work history. There are a lot of ways of massaging a resume to give only the information we want them to know while still telling the truth. If you have a specific situation in which you have a specific application and you're worried about how to deal with it, I would recommend again that you download that application or take a screenshot of it, reach out to your local career force location, and that day you can probably get some feedback specific to that situation. So we're going to talk quickly about the different types of formats. Whatever format you use, the top third is the most valuable. So use the format that allows you to show the most important aspects of your career as it relates to that employer in the top third. You want to include white space and you want it to be error-free. So there's a variety of ways you can format a resume. You can do them chronologically, and that's organized by job history, and that's the standard one that was used for many, many years. You can use a functional or skills-based resume, and that's organized by skills. So if you were in an industry that maybe the job title you had wasn't as obvious to an employer about what skills you developed in that job title, you might choose a functional or skills-based. It's also really good for someone starting out in a career because it allows you to talk about your skills in a way that's not tied to your employment history. And I'll give you examples here in a minute. And then a combination is those two combined in a format. No matter what format, even if it's chronological, you still have to target. I used to, for years, have people print off 20 copies of their chronological resume and think, well, this is just my work history. I can't change it. Yes, you can. You can talk about what was specific within that work history that relates to the employer that you are marketing yourself to. So here's a chronological resume. You can still put things like professional credentials, affiliations, accomplishments at the top, but then it goes right into your work history, and that's the thing they're going to focus on. Now, this is really good if you are on a linear career path, meaning that I did this within this industry, I was promoted to do this within this industry, and now next I want to do this within this industry. It's a very easy way for employers to find relevance of work history. Now, many people, myself included, throughout my career have been, at this type of work, and then I've gone to this type of career, and then I went to this type of career. A chronological resume is not going to be the best marketing tool for me. So instead, I would use something called a functional resume. And what I do there is I talk about the most important skill set to the employer's needs at the top. And notice the employment history is still there, still important. Unless you have dates on your employment history, your resume may be screened out. And that includes putting 2 years experience, 4 years experience instead of dates. So be very careful about that. But they still need to be on there, but they're not the most important thing. Where I did it is not as important as what I can do in this case. So that's a functional resume. And then for many people, they choose to use a combination resume, which will put relevant qualifications at the top and will allow you to really kind of, it's very malleable. You can do it a lot of different ways. You can format your resume to the needs of the situation. And it's okay, by the way, to have all three. I think it's a really good investment in your job search to have 3 versions of your resume, a combination, a functional, and a chronological. That way you can quickly reply to an employer's needs without having to worry about how it's formatted, getting all your dates and employers' names and position titles. Those are all going to have to be in all 3. If you have them pre-set up in a template, then you just look for the keywords of that position and apply them into or integrate them into your pre-existing template. So the basic parts of a resume are pretty standard. They've been here forever. You don't have to have all parts in every resume, but to start off with, you need to have your name on your resume. You don't necessarily have to have your full address. Now that depends. That depends on the situation. If you are worried about an employer, you know, filtering you out because you live maybe further away from this job, and maybe you're going to move to that area, or maybe you don't mind driving 50 miles a day, you may leave off the address. I generally leave it in for all the jobs I apply for because I want them to know that I'm from this area. When people leave off an address, it makes me wonder, do they live around here? And you might want them to not know that. I mean, if you don't live around there, you might want that left off. But if you are from an area and you are applying for a job within that area, sometimes having your address can be a benefit. I know a lot of us have cell phones. Some of us, I'm going to date myself, have landlines. You only have to put one number, and you don't have to say cell phone or home phone. If you're going to put home phone, you could put office phone, I guess, but generally just put one contact and make sure it has a professional voicemail on it. Make sure it's something you're checking daily. Also, make sure you have a professional email. This will get you filtered out when a human is looking at your resume. I've seen this, I would say hundreds of times, where someone will use a kind of a fun email address, and it presents them as unprofessional. And it happens more often than you'd think. Only use your LinkedIn on your heading if you are actively using LinkedIn, if it's an account that is complete. If you're in process right now, leave it off until it's ready. And next week, they'll be talking about LinkedIn in particular. A summary is something where you can potentially put an objective. I generally don't put objectives on a resume. If you're going to, make it specific to the job. Objective, mechanical engineer position posted on Minnesota Works ID 74382. That allows an employer to say, why am I looking at this resume? Oh, for this position, here's a posting number, and here's where our marketing has been successful. Putting a throwaway objective statement that says something like seeking a rewarding career, that's a throwaway statement. It's at the top of your resume where they spend most of their time and you just wasted a couple seconds. So you can leave that off in many cases. If you're going to put it, make it useful. A summary may be here's what I want you to see from the rest of my resume, that I'm a creative and motivated engineer with more than 10 years of experience. You're quantifying that. You're proving that. What makes me qualified, what makes me experienced? 10 years of experience. And then you can go into employment history. Now, this could be at the top or the bottom, depending on the format you use. I usually put the position title above where I did it. There are situations in which you'd switch that, but in most cases, it's more important what you did than where you did it. You want to make sure that your bullets you don't want to put 20 bullets under one job. You want to break that up into, I usually use 5 to 7 bullets. I try not to go more than 7. Sometimes you'll be in a situation in which you'll use more, but be aware that when I see a lot of bullets, it's really hard for me to focus on any one bullet. So my eye isn't drawn to things. I'm more likely to be drawn to figures, dollar signs, percentages. So in any group of bullets, attempt to prove a skill set or quantify a skill set by putting a number in there somewhere. Just make sure it's honest. If you're going to use the skills in a heading of themselves, make sure that the skill you are putting a heading on is something that is required of the job. Sometimes it's just changing how you title it. So if they're looking for a facilitator, and in my last resume I put a heading of training experience, well, now I'm going to put facilitation experience. It's okay to change the term as long as it's still true. Make sure you're using their terms to describe your skills, as long as you're being honest. And then generally at the bottom of our resume is where we put our education. Now, if your education is the most recent skill that you want to prove to an employer, or recent experience, then you put it at the top. If you just graduated, that's probably the most important. But as soon as you have work experience, that becomes the most important, because this is where you're actually using that training, that education in a work environment. If you have a recent certificate that relates to a field, you may put that at the top, and the reason is it would have the current date on it. I usually go back about 5 years for education, and then I leave the dates off after that point on a resume. In employment, usually go back about 15 years. There's exceptions to all of these. However, that's the general rule. Some other things you can include on a resume are military experience, volunteer experience, leadership experience, memberships. Be careful of that. Make sure they're relevant. Awards or recognitions, again, relevant. Work history is the most important, but if you have a couple of other important things, you can certainly put them in, but don't let them dominate your resume. We are running a little short on time, so we'll take one question here. Gloria?
Yeah, Art, I think this is a really important question. So the person is saying, I left a company at the height of my career, and then I started my own business and a family. And now I am ready to start applying again as my business runs itself and the kids are older. I recently was told by a professional resume writer that being a stay-at-home dad isn't important on a resume as it is not a job. Then online, it gives me different information. Why would a male starting a family be a bad thing and not a strength?
It's not a bad thing, obviously. But remember, when they're looking at a resume, they're looking for relatable skill sets. In that case, you may go with a skills-based resume, because if I see I'm looking at a resume and I don't see a date within the last few years, there's going to be questions. I mean, we can answer those questions in an interview. It's really hard to answer questions on a resume. So think about what are some potential red flags an employer could have based on their knowledge of everyone who's ever applied. They don't know your specific situation. So you choose the type of format that tells your story in the best way. That's where you put your volunteer experience. You know, I have 5 kids. I've been involved in every possible organization you can possibly imagine, and I've gained some skills from that. I can list that. There are even times where you can list your volunteer experience within your work history, as long as you put volunteer opportunity in parentheses after it. Again, that's such a specific question, and the dates and times would be very important towards the answer. So I'll take a look at that and I'll reach out to you so we can have a conversation about that. All right, accomplishment activity. Let's talk about how you take these skills and put it into an accomplishment statement. So the idea here is you don't want to use a passive tense. You want to say responsible for something or tasked with something. You want to make your statements powerful, and you want to give details and you want to give results. So the idea here would be, instead of kept inventory or called customers, it's very bland. I could assign anyone that task, but if instead you said, manage daily inventory of over 1,000 classifications of medical supplies, I'm putting a figure in there, I'm putting industry-specific information, and I'm putting an active verb to start my, my statement. The difference between this and this is huge on a resume. Many people try to cram in as many skills as possible, and they'll put like 3-column bulleted lists, and they'll put 20 different statements, but they're 2-word statements. And honestly, they don't mean much. Less is more on your resume. I'd rather you develop 5 skill sets than try to be everything to everybody, because that usually comes off as false. Another example, called customers. Maybe you're really good at cold calling. I can't stand cold calling. It's something that makes me itchy. It makes me so nervous. But if that's something you can do, that's something you can market about yourself to separate yourself from otherwise qualified candidates. So that's that kind of 2-part skill statement. And not only did you call customers, you cold called them. So you grew client base from 0 to 70 within 2 months by effectively using cold call techniques. Now, many people will not do this because they say, well, everyone in my industry starts at 0, and we all have to get to 70 to maintain employment. You may know that, an employer doesn't. So what may be commonplace to you can actually be a decent story or even a very effective story to the audience. So don't be afraid to tell what you did. Cover letter, briefly talking about a cover letter in the time we have here. I'm going to include a link to information specific about cover letters. However, we don't have time to get into everything that it needs to go into it. The one thing I would mention, though, is if an employer asks for it, you better have a good one. If they allow it, I would put one out also. If they give you the option and you choose not to use it, think about all the other people you're competing against. They may say, you know what, I'm going to take the extra time and put together a cover letter. Could it have been a waste of their effort? Possibly, but I guarantee you it was the best thing to do, because if an employer actually looks at the cover letters, they have marketed themselves better. They have taken the extra time, and it's going to show. So my recommendation is, if they allow it, do it. You can talk yourself out of it. You can find people that will tell you don't waste your time on a cover letter. It's out there on the internet. I'm going to be one dissenting voice that will say it can only benefit you, so why not? So what you put on there is why you're applying for the job, why you're interested in that job, explain how you match the employer's needs, and then include a thank you. And the document I'm going to send you will kind of step that out and show you kind of a template. And then if you are going to say you're going to follow up, if you say you can follow up, do it. That's your one opportunity to show follow through, but be realistic. If you say you're going to call them next week, put it on your calendar. Many people will say, I look forward to the opportunity to discuss my qualifications further in an interview. If that's your comfort level, I get it. That's my comfort level, but some job seekers will actually say, I will follow up with you next week to answer any questions you may have. And that's an opportunity. It's a gutsy opportunity to call an employer, but make sure you do it. Also, I said it first, I'll say it last. Once you get a resume together, make sure you have someone else look at it. And career force locations throughout the state of Minnesota are all open virtually. We're open over the phone. We're open through emails. Have someone look at your resume. They may not give you, you may not agree with everything they talk about, but they're going to give you some good information, and they're also going to be able to, spell check, look at the formatting issues, look at something as simple as, an elongated dash in between your dates that's different from the smaller dash than the other date. They look at resumes every day, and they're going to notice things that you don't. And it's going to be someone who now knows your skills and sees more jobs than you do. And they may have some ideas of where those jobs could be relevant. So that local connection is so important. Thank you for joining us today. We have time for possibly one more question, Glory, before we wrap up.
Okay. Do you recommend working the achievements in and throughout your work history rather than having an accomplishment section?
Sometimes you double up. If it's something that is requested specifically, you might want to put it at the top, and then you might want to tell a story. The key is, don't say something at the top of your accomplishment statements that are not reflected in your work history. You don't want to repeat it, but you might enhance it. Putting it in the accomplishment section at the top allows you to front end it, the most important things. But don't have something at the top that doesn't relate to your work history at all. Yeah, that's a common question, and you have to be tricky. It's a little tricky because you end up wanting to say the same thing twice, and you don't want to do that because that wastes valuable space.
I want to remind everyone, too, that Art will get to answer all of your questions when we send the follow-up material. There's a lot of good questions here that we just haven't had time to get to.
A lot of information to go through in an hour. I appreciate your time, and I wish you the best of luck in your job search, everyone.